We're in our sequence of videos about lists, and here I have some classic things to do with lists of numbers. Alright, so we're going to look at these one at a time. We have a grades list here, so question for you, how many items are in this grades list? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay? And this is one method to loop through everything in a list. So what do you think will be printed if I run this? So that just printed everything in the list. Another way to loop through a list is to do all the indexes. So the way the for loop works is if I give it a list there, then this variable x, it's first going to be the first thing in the list, and then the second, and then the third, and then the fourth, and then the fifth. The other way to do it is to have to have a variable that goes through all the possible indexes. So index 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And what do you think that is going to print? So here we have the indexes and then the values that are in those indexes using the square brackets to get those items out. Okay? Alright, so now I want to look at the next thing. It's a classic thing to do with a list is compute a total. So here I'm looping through all of the grades and I want to make a total, and if we're going to make a total, then you typically have a variable that starts at 0. You go through each of the items and add that onto the total, and after that loop is done, then we'll have the finished total. And so I can have the total here, and then if I divide the total by the number of grades that were there, that is the average. So we have a total there and an average, and that average looks like it's about right. You could add that up on your calculator to test it. Alright, so we have a bunch of numbers. This is how you compute a total and an average. Next up on our list of classic things to do is pick out the lowest. Alright, the way to pick out the lowest out of this, remember the computer can only do one thing at a time. So we're just going to remember what the lowest is. And this might be worth running in the debugger. So I'm going to run this one in the debugger. We could play computer on this one as well, but we're just going to do the debugger, just to see how this changes as we go. So we're going to run, and then we'll have our grades. There's our grades, and what is lowest going to be? 77. There it is at the bottom. Now we're going to go through, and what is the first value for x? There, x is 77. Is 77 less than 77? It's not. So then we go to the next. We're going to go to the next step in the loop. X is going to go to the next grade. There it's 82.5. Is that less than lowest? No. So we're going to go back up to the top of the loop, pick the next grade, which is 45. Is that less than lowest? It is, so we're going to get inside this if, and now we save that as our lowest. Okay, and we keep going through like this, and so we start off with just assuming that the first one's going to be the lowest, but then we check every other number, and anytime we see something smaller, we save it. Okay, so that gets us the lowest. We could do the same thing to get the highest. If we wanted to remove the lowest, then at the end we could do grades.remove lowest, and that would remove the lowest score. Another way that we could do this is we could keep track of the index where the lowest is. So we could have said it like that, instead of saving the grade, the position. And then, well, I'll put this down here. So instead of going over all the grades, we would go in the range of 0 up to the length of grades. And then anytime we'd be looking, instead of X, we would do, we're looking at the 0, index 1, index 2, and so on. So if the one we're looking at is less than grades bracket lowest I, then we would save that value of I, and when we're done, if we wanted to delete it, we could do it like this. If we needed to know what index the lowest was at. Okay. Now let's look at the last one here. How many times does something occur in a list? So if we're counting, we always start a count at 0 and we add 1 to the count at some point. So question for you, what is this loop printing a count of? We got a 1 there. What it's counting is how many of the grades are less than 70. Okay, so these are a few classic things that we often want to do with lists of numbers. These are things that you should remember. So put it on your list of programs to memorize. Looping through a list using the index, computing a total, figuring out the smallest or the largest, either this method or this method, and counting.